A young woman stabbed her boyfriend 108 times inside a small apartment, then gouged out her own eyes. But in the end, she was only sentenced to probation. That was not an isolated case. Over the past 20 years, the state of California has recorded numerous murders committed by women, with a range of motives: insurance money, jealousy, hatred, or secrets that were never explained. They had once been wives, mothers, healthcare workers, or preschool teachers. And then, they killed and were convicted. In this video, you will join us as we delve into the case files of the 10 most brutal female murderers in California. At the top of the list is Monica Sementilli, a wife involved in the plot to murder her husband for insurance money in Los Angeles in 2017. On the afternoon of January 23, 2017, in the city of Los Angeles, California, the police received an emergency call from a teenage girl reporting that her father was lying motionless in their backyard. When the authorities arrived at the scene, they found Fabio Sementilli, 49 years old, deceased, his body lying face down beside the swimming pool, bearing multiple stab wounds and a large injury to the head. Fabio was a well-known executive in the hair cosmetics industry, widely recognized in both the United States and Canada. Officers noted there were no signs of forced entry through the front door, but the backyard gate had been left open and there were unusual marks on the concrete. Initially, the police hypothesized that this might have been a botched robbery. However, as they reviewed security camera footage and phone data, the investigation began to uncover several anomalies. They promptly interviewed the wife, Monica Sementilli, then 45 years old, who stated that she had been driving her daughter to school when the incident occurred. During the verification process, the police discovered that Monica was having an extramarital affair with a man named Robert Baker, 55 years old, a former fitness trainer. The two had known each other previously and had been maintaining this relationship for over a year, concealing it from both family and friends. Through location data and message exchanges, investigators found that Baker had been near the victim's home on multiple occasions, including the day of the murder. Another critical factor was a life insurance policy worth $1.6 million under Fabio's name, with Monica listed as the primary beneficiary. After more than 3 months of investigation, the police concluded that Monica and Baker had orchestrated the murder of Fabio in order to collect the insurance money and make their relationship public. On May 4, 2017, Monica Sementilli and Robert Baker were arrested and charged with first-degree murder as co-conspirators. According to the indictment, Monica had provided detailed information about the family's daily routine, the times Fabio was usually home alone, accessible routes from the back gate, and how to avoid security cameras. Baker was the one who directly entered the house and carried out the murder using a weapon that has not been disclosed, then fled the scene. Throughout the years-long trial, both the defendants maintained their innocence. Monica insisted that she had no knowledge of any murder plot and claimed she was being falsely accused because of her illicit relationship. The prosecution presented numerous messages in which the pair had discussed freedom, no more restraints, and starting over. Furthermore, location data and footage from a neighbor's camera confirmed that Baker had been near the victim's home during the exact time Fabio died. In 2023, Robert Baker unexpectedly pleaded guilty under the condition that he would not face the death penalty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In March of 2025, following a full trial and the court's conclusion that sufficient evidence existed to convict, the Los Angeles court sentenced Monica Sementilli to the same punishment, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The victim's family was not fully present at the sentencing hearing, but a representative of one of the couple's 3 children wrote a letter to the court, describing the case as a permanent scar in memory. The death of Fabio Sementilli once shocked public opinion in Canada, where he was born and built his reputation in the professional beauty industry. Monica is currently serving her sentence at a maximum security facility for female inmates in the state of California, with no possibility of appeal or early release. In second place, Kaitlyn Conley, a clinic employee who was convicted following the suspicious death of her ex-boyfriend's mother. In July 2015, Mary Yoder, a chiropractor in the city of Whitesboro, New York, died suddenly after 3 days of hospitalization due to vomiting, diarrhea, and acute kidney failure. Initially, the hospital suspected a gastrointestinal virus, but the autopsy revealed a high concentration of colchicine in her body, a medication used to treat gout. Mary Yoder had no relevant medical history and had not been prescribed the drug. Police began investigating the case as a deliberate poisoning. Among those who had direct access to Mary Yoder, Kaitlyn Conley, 23 years old, a clinic employee and the ex-girlfriend of her son, quickly became a person of interest. The investigation revealed that Kaitlyn had a long and tumultuous relationship with Adam Yoder, the victim's son, involving multiple breakups and reconciliations. According to the family, the relationship had been tense and left behind considerable emotional strain after the final breakup. Data recovered from her computer and anonymous email accounts showed that Kaitlyn had searched for ways to purchase colchicine online from overseas using a fake name, and had placed an order to her home address several weeks before Mary Yoder's death. In addition, she had sent an anonymous email to the police accusing Adam of murdering his mother, an act later determined to be a deliberate attempt to mislead the investigation. Although there were no direct witnesses, electronic records, order timelines, GPS data from her phone, and inconsistent statements were enough to bring Kaitlyn to trial on charges of murder. The first trial took place in 2017, but the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict. The case was retried in 2018. At the second trial, the prosecution asserted that Kaitlyn had secretly laced food or daily supplement capsules used by Mary Yoder at the clinic with poison. The defense argued that the evidence was purely circumstantial, with no biological traces linking Kaitlyn to the handling or preparation of colchicine. Nonetheless, the jury found her guilty of first-degree manslaughter. The sentence was pronounced 23 years in prison. Kaitlyn was transferred to Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in the state of New York. In early 2025, the state appellate court unexpectedly overturned the conviction. The legal grounds cited were that Kaitlyn had not been permitted by her attorney to testify in her own defense, a right guaranteed by the Constitution. The court declared this a serious procedural violation that rendered the trial invalid, although no new determination was made regarding her culpability. Kaitlyn Conley was released immediately thereafter. The prosecutor has not confirmed whether the case will be retried, but the victim's family has described the overturned conviction as a failure of the justice system. Mary Yoder's death is still regarded as a deliberate poisoning, and Kaitlyn remains the only person ever charged. The case has become a subject of public controversy due to the complex relationship between the perpetrator, the victim, and the family. It also raises questions about the boundary between circumstantial evidence and constitutional rights in modern poisoning cases, where toxins can be purchased online, are odorless, tasteless, and nearly impossible to trace. In third place, Heather Barron, the mother sentenced to life in prison after the painful death of her 10-year-old son in their own home. On the afternoon of June 20th, 2018, in the city of Lancaster, Los Angeles County, California, the emergency line 911 received a call from Heather Barron, reporting that her 10-year-old son, Anthony Avalos, was unconscious inside the house. When paramedics arrived at the scene, the boy was found in critical condition, showing signs of severe dehydration, unresponsiveness, low body temperature, and a body covered in bruises, swelling, and head trauma. Anthony was rushed to the hospital but died just 1 day later, on June 21st. The autopsy report determined the cause of death to be severe brain trauma, combined with multiple internal injuries and prolonged malnutrition. Everything found on the boy's body pointed to a systematic, long-term pattern of torture. Within 48 hours of Anthony's death, police expanded their investigation to the boy's residence, the apartment shared with his biological mother, Heather Barron, and her boyfriend, Kareem Leva. What was uncovered during the initial interrogation quickly shifted the case from a suspected accident to a murder investigation. Detectives discovered that Heather and Kareem had a long history of child abuse. In Anthony's case, according to records from the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services, there had been at least 13 reports from teachers, neighbors, and relatives between 2013 and 2017, alleging beatings, starvation, and threats against the boy. However, no effective protective measures had ever been implemented during that time. When questioned, Heather Barron initially claimed that Anthony had fallen and become weak afterward. However, testimony from other children living in the home and physical evidence at the scene completely contradicted this explanation. One of Barron's children testified that Anthony was frequently punished by being forced to stand for hours on his tiptoes, made to kneel on uncooked rice, denied food for days, and beaten with belts, sticks, and kitchen tools. In the time leading up to his death, Anthony had been forced to drink bathroom cleaning fluid, strangled, and violently struck on the head. The boy's nutritional status was described as significantly below normal. He weighed only 75 pounds, equivalent to a 7-year-old child, despite being 10 years old. In June 2018, Heather Barron and Kareem Leva were formally charged with the following crimes: first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, and aggravating circumstances for intentional crimes and acts of torture. Initially, prosecutors considered the death penalty for both, but later pursued sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The two defendants opted for a bench trial without a jury. The trial, presided over by Judge Sam Ota, began in late 2022 and continued until March 2023. During sentencing, the judge declared this to be one of the most brutal child murder cases ever tried in Los Angeles County Court. He described the level of cruelty as continuous, organized, and intentional, in which Heather Barron, despite being the biological mother of the victim, not only failed to stop the torture, but actively participated in the abuse. On April 25, 2023, Heather Barron was officially sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Her boyfriend, Kareem Leva, received the same sentence. During sentencing, a representative of the victim's family stated, "Anthony cried out for help in silence for years. But every door closed in his face." The case file was also used by the state legislature as a reference for several proposed reforms to the child protection system in 2024. To this day, there is no evidence suggesting Heather Barron has any plans or grounds for a successful appeal. In fourth place is Dana Rivers, a former teacher who caused shock when she was convicted of murdering 3 members of a family in Oakland in 2016. In the early morning of November 11, 2016, residents of Dunbar Drive in the city of Oakland, California, called the police after hearing gunshots and detecting the smell of smoke coming from a 2-story house. When authorities arrived, they found smoke billowing from the garage, where a motorcycle was burning. At the scene, 3 individuals were confirmed dead: Patricia Wright, 57 years old, along with her wife, Charlotte Nikki Reed, 41 years old, and Nikki's son from a previous relationship, Damian Reed, 19 years old. All three victims had died from multiple gunshot and stab wounds. Police quickly apprehended a woman wearing a blood-stained shirt as she attempted to leave the house through the back door. She was identified as Dana Rivers, 61 years old, formerly a high school teacher and a well-known transgender activist in the local community. Found on her person were a handgun and a blood-stained knife. Additionally, evidence indicated that Rivers had set fire to the motorcycle in the garage, likely in an attempt to cover up the crime. During the investigation, prosecutors established that Dana Rivers had a prior connection to the two female victims. She had previously been a member of the same motorcycle club as Charlotte Reed, the Deviants MC based in Northern California. However, the relationship had reportedly deteriorated. According to testimonies from former members of the group, Charlotte Reed had once reported Rivers' conduct within the club, which led to Rivers being expelled from the group in 2015. Police found no signs of the forced entry, suggesting that Rivers may have been granted access due to prior acquaintance. During interrogation, Dana Rivers refused to answer most questions and requested a lawyer. At trial, the prosecution described the crime as deliberate, violent, and premeditated, arguing that Rivers had brought the weapons and incendiary items to the victim's home. All three victims were attacked in succession. Both women were shot and stabbed multiple times, and the son was shot while trying to flee upstairs. The defense did not deny Rivers' presence at the scene, but argued that the motives were unclear and there was no definitive evidence of premeditation. They also cited that their client had a history of post-traumatic psychological disorders and was on medication. However, the medical records were deemed insufficient to serve as grounds for mitigation. The case extended for nearly 7 years due to multiple delays involving legal procedures, attorney changes, and forensic evaluation issues. During this period, Dana Rivers was held without bail. In November 2022, the official trial began, featuring full witness testimonies, forensic reports, and crime scene documentation. In closing arguments, the prosecution contended that the murders stemmed from a prolonged dispute, and the method of attack demonstrated clear intent to kill. On November 7, 2023, the jury found Dana Rivers guilty of first-degree murder for all three victims, with aggravating circumstances for multiple homicides and use of deadly weapons. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, Rivers showed no emotion and declined to make a final statement. The victims' families were fully present, bringing photos of their loved ones and telling the press that justice has finally come, though very late. The case drew widespread media attention across the state due to the defendant's identity and background. Dana Rivers had once gained recognition in 1999 when she won a lawsuit against wrongful termination due to being transgender, a landmark moment in the LGBT rights movement in California. However, the 2016 case marked the end of her career and public standing. Dana Rivers is currently serving her sentence at a high-security women's correctional facility in California, with no chance of sentence reduction or parole in the future. In fifth place is Larissa Schuster, a chemist who was convicted of killing her husband with acid in the city of Fresno in 2003. On July 10, 2003, police in Fresno County, California, received a missing person report from a friend of Timothy Schuster, a medical laboratory technician, after he failed to show up for work and had not contacted anyone for several days. At the time, Timothy was in the process of separating from his wife, Larissa Schuster, 43 years old, a chemist employed at a local biological laboratory. The police began their investigation at Timothy's residence, but found no signs of forced entry or struggle. Through interviews with family members, friends, and the victim's attorney, authorities learned that the marriage between Timothy and Larissa had lasted over a decade, but in recent years had become increasingly strained, particularly over child custody and property rights. While reviewing surveillance footage and call logs near the time of his disappearance, police discovered that Timothy had visited Larissa's home a few days before vanishing. A search warrant was issued for Larissa's home and laboratory. There, investigators found containers holding highly corrosive chemicals, including hydrochloric and sulfuric acid, substances not typically used in such large quantities for standard laboratory testing. A further search in the storage area behind the facility revealed a sealed plastic drum emitting a strange odor and an unusually high temperature. When opened, police discovered a decomposing body, later identified as Timothy Schuster. The remains showed signs that he had been placed into the drum while still alive or just unconscious before acid was poured in. The cause of death was determined to be severe internal damage from chemical burns. Injuries to the head and neck indicated restraint and violence before the victim was placed in the container. Larissa Schuster was arrested shortly thereafter and charged with first-degree murder. She denied any involvement in her husband's death and claimed to have no knowledge of how the body ended up in the laboratory storage area. However, police found her DNA and fingerprints on both the container and tools such as rope, plastic bags, and gloves. Additionally, transaction records showed she had purchased large quantities of acid just days before Timothy's disappearance, quantities inconsistent with her professional needs. Prosecutors argued that Larissa had premeditated the crime, using her scientific knowledge to carry it out, and selecting a method of body disposal that could hinder standard forensic examination. Notably, Larissa did not act alone. Police identified the involvement of a young man named James Fagone, 21 years old, a former employee at her laboratory. Fagone was accused of assisting in restraining the victim and helping to move the body. During the trial, Fagone testified that Larissa orchestrated the entire plan, from luring Timothy to her home, drugging him, placing him in the drum, to pouring in the acid. In exchange for his testimony, Fagone received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. The trial of Larissa Schuster began in 2007. She pled not guilty, and her defense argued that Fagone's testimony was unreliable and self-serving in hopes of reducing his own sentence. However, the jury was not convinced. Physical evidence, chemical purchase records, witness testimony, and motives related to finances and child custody all supported the conviction. On May 11, 2008, Larissa Schuster was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom saw no emotional display from the defendant. The victim's family, including the couple's son, made no public comments following the verdict. The case was labeled "Acid Lady" by the media and became one of the most notorious examples of using scientific knowledge to commit a violent crime. Larissa is currently serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility in California, with no right to seek sentence reduction or parole for the remainder of her term. In sixth place is Angelina Rodriguez, a woman convicted of poisoning her husband in Montebello in 2000 in order to collect life insurance money. On September 9, 2000, police in the city of Montebello, California, received a report from the local hospital regarding an unusual death. Frank Rodriguez, 41 years old, a high school teacher, had been admitted in respiratory distress and convulsions and died shortly afterward. His wife, Angelina Rodriguez, who had brought him to the hospital, stated that her husband had shown signs of difficulty breathing after dinner. Since the cause of death was unclear, the hospital requested a forensic autopsy. Initially, preliminary results did not identify a specific toxin, but a number of inconsistencies in Angelina's statements and behavior prompted the police to open an investigation. During the evidence collection process, investigators discovered that Mrs. Rodriguez had quickly contacted insurance companies just a few days after her husband's death, requesting to process a claim for nearly $250,000 from a life insurance policy that had been signed not long before. This urgency drew particular attention when matched with findings from the coroner's office, which indicated signs of ethylene glycol poisoning, a substance commonly found in automotive antifreeze. Upon further analysis of tissue and body fluid samples, the medical examiner confirmed the cause of death as ethylene glycol poisoning, a sweet-tasting compound that is easy to ingest but causes severe damage to the liver, kidneys, and nervous system if not treated promptly. As a result, the investigation centered on Angelina Rodriguez. During a search of the home, police found a water bottle with traces of ethylene glycol in the garage, along with tools used to transfer liquid into drinking containers. Another key piece of evidence was found through searches on the home computer, where Angelina had looked up information on colorless, odorless poisons that cause delayed death. Documents from the insurance company also showed that Angelina was listed as the policyholder and had made multiple phone calls to confirm the payout procedure. When confronted, Angelina insisted she knew nothing about the toxin and suggested that her husband might have been accidentally exposed to chemicals while working on his car. However, the prosecution argued that there was no evidence Frank had been handling mechanical equipment, nor did he have any medical history that could explain the symptoms of death. Notably, a major detail emerged when authorities expanded their background investigation. In 1993, Angelina's infant daughter, only 13 months old, had died from choking on a baby bottle. The case had been ruled accidental at the time, but in light of the new context, investigators suspected it could have been intentional. However, due to the lack of forensic samples and insufficient legal evidence, the 1993 case could not be reopened. The trial of Angelina Rodriguez began in 2003. The prosecution alleged that she had planned to murder her husband to claim insurance money, using basic chemical knowledge to select a toxin that would be hard to detect and cause symptoms resembling natural illness. The defense responded by questioning the validity of the forensic analysis and arguing that Angelina had a normal, loving relationship with her husband, lacking any clear motive for murder. Nevertheless, the physical evidence, search history, witness testimonies, and insurance documentation were found by the jury to be consistent. On October 16, 2003, Angelina Rodriguez was sentenced to death for premeditated first-degree murder, with an aggravating circumstance related to the prior death of her child. After more than 20 years on death row at a women's prison in California, in 2024, her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without parole, following the state's new moratorium on the death penalty. Angelina Rodriguez is currently serving her sentence at a high-security facility, with no right to sentence reduction or early release. The case has been frequently cited in legal literature for its meticulous preparation and the use of a toxic chemical as a subtle yet lethal means of murder. In seventh place is Jade Janks, a woman convicted of killing her stepfather in Encinitas after discovering explicit photos of herself on his computer. On January 1, 2021, police in San Diego County, California, received a report from a woman stating that her stepfather, Thomas Merriman, 64 years old, had gone missing after leaving a local hospital to return to his home in the town of Encinitas. The caller was Jade Janks, 38 years old, the biological daughter of Mr. Merriman's ex-wife. In her initial statement, Jade claimed that she had picked Mr. Merriman up from the hospital following a minor surgery, but he had asked to be dropped off at his own house instead of hers as originally planned. However, this account began to conflict with the evidence gathered. Police quickly uncovered surveillance footage from in front of Merriman's house, showing that it was Jade who had been driving the victim's vehicle during the time frame he was supposedly returning home. During the investigation, Jade Janks's phone was confiscated, and it provided several noteworthy leads. In a series of messages sent on December 31, 2020, just hours before the victim's disappearance, Jade wrote to a close friend, "I cleaned everything up. I cannot let him live." Then, on January 2, 2021, the body of Thomas Merriman was discovered beneath a pile of trash in the backyard of Jade Janks's residence, covered with various miscellaneous items and dried vegetation. Forensic examination revealed that Merriman had died from asphyxiation due to a heavy object compressing his chest while in a motionless position. There were no signs of beating or stabbing, but scratches on his wrists and mouth indicated he had been restrained in the period leading up to his death. When interrogated, Jade Janks shifted from denial to silence and requested an attorney. As the trial approached, prosecutors introduced a key element regarding motive. According to them, several weeks before the incident, Jade had discovered over 100 nude photos of herself on Merriman's personal computer. Merriman had once been her legal guardian when she was a child. The photos were believed to have been retrieved from an old hard drive that Jade had taken in for repair, without deleting its contents. Prosecutors argued that this discovery triggered a psychological shock that led the defendant to plan the murder. In message logs extracted from her phone, Jade described feelings of betrayal, disgust, and an inability to forgive. She also messaged an acquaintance saying, "I want him gone from my life." The trial took place in December of 2022, drawing major public attention due to the private nature of the case and the complex family relationship. Jade Janks pled not guilty, insisting she had no intent to kill Merriman and only wanted to confront him about the discovery of the personal photos. The defense argued that the death might have been accidental, possibly resulting from Merriman overdosing on sedatives after surgery and collapsing while cleaning. However, the prosecution countered with forensic findings showing no signs of overdose and argued that the body had been moved, arranged, and deliberately concealed. Additionally, no emergency calls were made, even though the estimated time of death spanned several hours. After nearly 2 weeks of deliberations, on December 21, 2022, the jury found Jade Janks guilty of first-degree murder, determining that her actions were premeditated and driven by a specific motive. She was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, with no possibility of parole before serving at least 25 years. At sentencing, Jade maintained a cold demeanor, did not speak, and showed no remorse. The victim's family, already fractured, did not attend the proceedings in full. The case stirred widespread debate in the media and on social networks about privacy, moral boundaries, and the complexities of long-standing family relationships. Jade Janks is currently serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility in Southern California. In 8th place, Bryn Spejcher, a female audio engineer who committed a homicide in a Thousand Oaks apartment during a psychotic episode. On the evening of May 28, 2018, police in the city of Thousand Oaks, California, received an emergency call from the Los Feliz Drive apartment complex. Upon arrival, they discovered a man lying on the floor with multiple stab wounds, next to a woman in a state of panic, using a knife to injure her own eyes. The victim was Chad O'Melia, 26 years old, an electronics sales associate. The woman was Bryn Spejcher, 27 years old, an audio engineer for a technology company. The two had only been dating for a few weeks. During the forensic examination, investigators recorded a total of 108 stab wounds on the victim. There were no clear signs of struggle. No strong stimulants were found in either of their systems other than cannabis. According to her initial statement, Bryn and Chad had consumed cannabis through an electronic device earlier that evening. Within minutes, Bryn began exhibiting signs of psychosis, screaming and speaking incoherently. In a state of complete loss of control, she repeatedly stabbed Chad with a kitchen knife. After he collapsed, Bryn continued to blind herself using a sharp object before the police intervened. At the time of her arrest, Bryn had little recollection of her actions, repeatedly asking why she was in the hospital and insisting she had no intent to kill. Investigators determined that the act was intentional and resulted in death, but it was not driven by hatred, jealousy, or revenge. Forensic records and psychiatric testimony confirmed that Bryn experienced an acute psychotic episode due to an abnormal reaction to cannabis, which caused her to lose her grasp on reality. Chad O'Melia's family repeatedly urged the prosecution to pursue first-degree murder charges. However, the prosecutors ultimately opted for a lesser charge, filing for involuntary manslaughter based on her psychological state at the time of the incident. The trial was held in December 2023 at the Ventura County Superior Court. Throughout the proceedings, the defense emphasized that Bryn had no criminal record, held a college degree, maintained stable employment, and had no prior history of mental illness. It was reportedly her first time using cannabis, and Chad had suggested it. Medical experts confirmed that Bryn had experienced an acute psychotic reaction, a rare but possible effect in first-time users. Meanwhile, the prosecution argued that she had made the conscious choice to use the substance and ultimately caused a death through violent, unchecked actions. In the end, Bryn Spejcher was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but was not sentenced to prison. Judge Gregory D. Totten issued a sentence of 2 years of felony probation, 100 hours of community service, mandatory psychological treatment, and a no-contact order with the victim's family. The decision drew sharp criticism from Chad's family, who called the sentence an insult. The victim's mother spoke in court, "My son was stabbed 108 times, and she gets to go home." The case quickly captured the attention of media outlets across the state of California due to its rare circumstances. A woman with no criminal background, causing a death through extreme violence, but determined to have lacked criminal responsibility at the time. Public opinion remained divided. Some viewed the outcome as a humane recognition of mental illness, while others believed the legal system had ignored the real consequences of a killing. As of mid-2025, Bryn Spejcher remains under probation, living in Southern California, and has not made any public appearances since the trial. In 9th place is Melissa Huckaby, a preschool teacher sentenced to life imprisonment for the kidnapping and murder of an 8-year-old girl in Tracy in 2009. On the afternoon of March 27, 2009, in the city of Tracy, California, 8-year-old Sandra Cantu left her home to play with friends in the Mobile Estates Park neighborhood, where she lived with her family. A nearby security camera captured footage of Sandra joyfully running across the yard, but she never returned home. The family immediately reported her missing, and a large-scale search effort was launched across the area. Dozens of volunteers, police officers, and search dogs were mobilized. For nearly 2 weeks, searches were conducted continuously, but to no avail. On the morning of April 6, 2009, a wastewater treatment worker discovered a suitcase floating in a pond near an agricultural zone. When opened, the suitcase contained the body of Sandra, bound, fully clothed, showing signs of sexual assault and death by asphyxiation. The discovery shocked the entire community, especially because the victim was a well-behaved elementary school student with no known conflicts. The investigation was escalated to a homicide case involving both the FBI and state police. As data was reviewed, investigators began to focus on Melissa Huckaby, 28 years old, a preschool teacher at the local church and a neighbor of the victim's family. She lived with her grandparents in the same mobile home park and was a single mother to a 5-year-old daughter who attended the same school as Sandra. Initially, Melissa appeared at prayer meetings and memorials, even helping distribute missing person flyers. However, several details began to raise suspicion. Police discovered that Melissa had reported a missing suitcase, matching the one used to contain the body, a few days before it was found. Additionally, a note listing sedative dosage found at the crime scene matched a prescription Melissa had previously received. During questioning, Melissa gave conflicting and inconsistent accounts regarding the time she had left home on the day Sandra disappeared. Blood traces found inside the church where Melissa worked matched the victim's DNA. In a storage room at the church, investigators also found rope similar to that used in the suitcase. On April 10, 2009, Melissa Huckaby was arrested and charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. During interrogation, she repeatedly changed her story, at times claiming Sandra had climbed into her car and died in an accident, at other times saying she knew nothing. However, physical evidence and forensic analysis pointed to a premeditated and deliberate act. Facing the death penalty, Melissa unexpectedly agreed to plead guilty in May of 2010 under a deal with prosecutors to avoid the maximum sentence. She admitted to drugging the victim, tying her up, causing death by suffocation, then concealing the body in a suitcase and dumping it in the wastewater pond. The court sentenced Melissa Huckaby to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, she appeared dazed and offered no direct apology to the victim's family. The case deeply disturbed the public in California, not only due to its brutality, but also because of the defendant's identity. A mother, a preschool teacher, living in a small community and known to the victim's family. The media labeled it one of the most heartbreaking and baffling cases, as there was no clear financial motive or personal conflict. Prosecutors also confirmed that they were unable to determine a definitive reason for Melissa's actions. Some records indicated that she had a history of depression and had undergone psychiatric treatment, though not to the extent of establishing legal insanity. Sandra's family rejected the plea and maintained that Melissa should have received the death penalty. Melissa is currently serving her sentence at a maximum security women's correctional facility under special supervision. Closing the list is Kristin Rossum, a forensic specialist convicted following the suspicious death of her husband in San Diego. On the morning of November 6, 2000, police in San Diego, California, received a report from Kristin Rossum, an employee at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, that her husband, Gregory DeVillers, had been found unconscious in the bedroom of their apartment. When the emergency medical team arrived, the victim had already passed away. His body showed no visible signs of trauma. A single red rose was placed on his chest, a detail initially thought to symbolize mourning, but later became a key point of suspicion. Kristin Rossum, 24 years old at the time, held a master's degree in biochemistry and worked in the very office responsible for analyzing toxic substances in local autopsies. She was the first to discover her husband's death and suggested the theory that he had taken his own life due to psychological stress. However, the autopsy revealed that Gregory's blood contained a fatal concentration of fentanyl, a painkiller 100 times more potent than morphine. Gregory had no prescription history and no known use of opioids. The investigation took a new turn when authorities reviewed the personal backgrounds of both the victim and the suspect. Gregory, a manager at a private company, had shown no signs of depression. Meanwhile, Kristin Rossum was involved in an extramarital affair with her direct superior at work, Dr. Michael Robertson. According to testimony from family members and colleagues, Gregory had recently discovered the affair and threatened to expose it to management, which could have resulted in job loss or internal investigation. 1 week before his death, Gregory told his brother he felt watched and suspected something was wrong. Additionally, messages and emails retrieved from a personal computer revealed that Kristin had searched for information about fentanyl and how to eliminate traces of poison in the human body. Kristin Rossum denied all accusations. She claimed that Gregory had either stolen fentanyl from her workplace or found a way to obtain it elsewhere. However, the office's toxic substance inventory records did not match the proper tracking procedures. Prosecutors accused Kristin of using her professional position to steal fentanyl, then poisoning her husband on the night of November 5th by mixing it into a drink or a fake capsule. The motive was identified as preventing Gregory from revealing the affair and clearing the way for a new relationship. Another crucial detail: the red rose, the same flower featured in Kristin's favorite film, American Beauty, which she and Gregory had previously watched together. According to the prosecution, placing the rose was a staged attempt to dramatize the scene and emotionally mislead investigators. The trial began in October 2002 at the San Diego County Superior Court. The defense argued that there was no physical evidence proving Kristin directly administered the poison. However, circumstantial evidence, including the sequence of events, her access to fentanyl, a clear motive, and computer data, was sufficient to persuade the jury. On November 12, 2002, Kristin Rossum was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. She is currently serving her sentence at the Central California Women's Facility, CCWF, in the state of California. All appeals since then have been denied. The victim's family later filed a civil lawsuit, and a federal jury ordered Kristin to pay over $100 million in damages to Gregory's relatives. However, since she had no assets, the civil ruling was largely symbolic. The case has become a frequently cited example in forensic training courses, highlighting the risks of abusing access to toxic substances in sensitive professions. As of mid-2025, Kristin Rossum continues to maintain her innocence and has not made any public appearances since her conviction. Among the 10 cases that took place in California, there were moments that seemed to belong to ordinary life. A preschool teacher, a lab technician, a young mother, a widowed woman who never remarried. Yet, from those very roles, acts of murder emerged, with planning, with tools, and with efforts to erase all traces. Not every case came with a full explanation, and not every testimony aligned, but the consequences were irreversible. Behind each verdict lies a long trail of loss, fracture, and pain. Do you notice any common threads among these female perpetrators? Share your thoughts in the comments below.